The buccaneers of the West Indies relied on surprise. Much of what we know of their deeds comes through one book, The Buccaneers of America, which was first published in Dutch in 1678. It was written by a man who sailed with them for 6 years. When Exelkamin sailed for the West Indies, he had no intention of being a pirate. He had been sold as an indentured servant to the governor of Tortuga. Alarmed that Exelkamin was going to die, his master sold him quickly for 70 pieces of 8 to a surgeon who taught him the trade. And from this man, Exelkamin won his freedom.
Being now at liberty, I determined to enter into the wicked order of the pirates.
Exelkamin's pen was to make them famous and infamous for the next 300 years. Exelkamin admired the courage of the buccaneers, but he was critical of their cruelty, a conflict that is evident in his account of Sir Henry Morgan. Morgan was born in 1635 in Wales in a small manor on the garden estate of Tredegar. Tredegar is a magnificent house, and Morgan always claimed he came from an aristocratic family. Historians are not sure. Many think he was actually born in a rather more modest farmhouse nearby called Pencarron. There are many pictures of Morgan, but historians don't believe any are authentic. Not even this portrait from the first edition of Exelkamin's book. There is also some mystery about how and why Morgan went to the West Indies. Exelkamin claimed he sold himself as an indentured servant. Morgan always denied this. He was a gentleman adventurer. Certainly, by 1658, he was learning his trade from a British officer, Christopher Mings.
I land my men some distance from the town, march them inland, go around the defenses, and then attack from the rear where they least expect us.
Is it always that simple?
For me, yes. I've taken treasure all over the Americas, from Maine to Santiago de Cuba. More treasure than Drake.
By the time Morgan became one of them, the buccaneers had developed some strange and almost progressive practices. They were known as the Brethren of the Coast. By the standards of the time, they were remarkably democratic. It was their custom to elect a captain for each expedition. The captain and the crew each had a contract. The contract determined how much booty each member of the crew would get. The contract specified that during a battle, the captain had to be obeyed. At any other time, a meeting of the crew could be convened to question his tactics and his plans. The meeting could vote to depose him. If a buccaneer was wounded in battle, there was a set rate of compensation. Losing a leg was worth 500 pieces of 8, an eye 100 pieces. By the age of 23, Morgan had impressed his fellows enough to be elected commander.
Boys, over there.
The first expeditions Morgan carried out proved he had courage, cunning, and luck. Morgan raided the town of Portobello on the Atlantic coast of Panama. where the Spanish gathered treasure to ship back to Europe.
Captain Morgan believed the governor would not fire if he saw monks and nuns exposed, so he forced them to use ladders to climb the walls of the fort.
But the governor paid no heed. Monks and nuns were slaughtered. The town was taken, its treasury was taken. The spoils were massive.
They found in ready money 250,000 pieces of eight, besides cloth, linen, and other goods. This exploit made Captain Morgan famous.
Even those who disapproved of pirates often admired their courage. Exelchamin admired Sir Henry Morgan for the way he inspired his men. Morgan marched them across the mountains and jungles of Panama. Their goal, Panama City and its treasures. The landscape was beautiful, but the journey was harsh. Morgan's men endured terrible miseries. They had to eat leather. They ran out of water. Many died of tropical diseases. But Morgan willed them on, and they managed to capture and destroy the fabled city of Panama. And now, for the first time, Morgan displayed those traits of cruelty that Exelchamin disapproved of.
You could be my queen, my mistress, my love.
I love my husband.
After a few days here with bread and water and rats, we'll see.
The only valuable the soldiers and monks of Panama managed to save was the golden altar of the cathedral. This was too heavy to lift, so they quickly painted it white, and Morgan ignored it, thinking it was just painted wood. Morgan's ships returned to Spanish Town laden with booty. The Jamaicans gave him a hero's welcome. The only man who was not happy was the governor. Britain had signed a treaty with Spain. As far as diplomats were concerned, Morgan was a pirate.
You're under arrest.
You're sacrificing me to the King of Spain. I'd rather be a pirate than a politician.
Morgan was taken back to London, where his reputation intrigued the town.
I met Sir Henry Morgan. He was so charming, so heroic. I could have eaten him like a newfangled chocolate.
King Charles II was a complex character. He had a certain affection for rogues. He demanded to see Morgan and was fascinated by Morgan's stories.
Who better, sir, to stop piracy in Port Royal than its greatest pirate? I knight you and name you Governor General of Jamaica.
Morgan went back to Port Royal and established himself as the governor, as the king wanted. Morgan liked being governor of the island and was careful to catch enough pirates to satisfy King Charles. Port Royal developed into the richest port in the Caribbean. Every day in its bay, at least 100 ships were at anchor. The boats unloaded all kinds of cargo. One small sign of how rich Morgan became is this: his silver collection, which is still housed in a small church in Port Royal. The buccaneer with breeding loved the finest tankards, goblets, plates and chalices. Morgan might now be respectable, but he had no intention of allowing that to interfere with his driving need to amass gold. In 1678, Exelkamin published his book. The descriptions of his own cruelty outraged Morgan, and he sued the publishers for libel and won. The second edition defended the great pirate, noting that other buccaneers had been more cruel than Morgan, and with rather typical British contempt for foreigners, that if those things were performed, the Spaniards deserved them. Meanwhile, in 1688, Morgan was dying. The great days of Port Royal as a buccaneer's capital were passing. But what finally reduced the place to the fishing village it is now was the great earthquake of 1692, which was seen as a judgment of God. Fishers and divers are the only ones who can admire the glories of Port Royal. The ruins lie 30 feet deep.